So today I want to focus on a disciple named Dorcas. She is remembered as one devoted to good works and acts of charity. Or as the NIV translates it, Dorcas was always doing good and helping the poor. Isn't that the way of the Christian? Well, Reverend Dr. James Howell, who's a Methodist minister, shared in a reflection that sometimes people would come to him and they would say, I feel hollow spiritually. I don't feel connected to God. And he remarks that he always feels just a little bit embarrassed because, well, we have this rather pedestrian formula for how to connect with God. I mean, it's not like we say, go and have a vision on a road. We don't say that. We say things like, read your Bible, or pray every day, or go and do good and help the poor. And it works, this simple formula. But of course, when we look around out there, we see a culture that has drifted so far away from this. When we live in a culture that, when it comes to people who are poor or people who are different, there's a meanness and a harshness. And everyone thinks that's cool, it's the right thing, but not Christians. Christianity hasn't changed. We are about doing good and helping the poor. Now, Dr. Howell goes on to say that he'll never, for the rest of his life, think about Dorcas without recalling a time when he and his wife and other members of their congregation traveled to Kenya on a mission trip. They were visiting a Zoe mission that they supported there. Now, I had not heard of Zoe Ministry before, but my curiosity was piqued. My daughter's name is Zoe. I have to tell you, it's quite a remarkable ministry. They work to empower impoverished children to become self-sufficient, to move beyond charity so they can care for themselves. One way it's described is Zoe or Zoe minister would come to a young person who has siblings, and keep in mind they're all orphans. There are so many orphans in Kenya. And this Zoe minister would ask this child, what would you like to be? And the child might respond, a farmer. Now, instead of saying, well, good luck with that, what Zoe would do is it would give him his first plow and some seeds. And then he would start to work his farm, and he'd have a farmer there who would mentor him and other people around him who support him. And then pretty soon, he becomes independent, and he's supporting all of his siblings. And then he starts helping others, and it goes on and on from there, trickles out. Now, while Dr. Howell and his congregation were there, they got to meet one of these orphans. Her name was Lena. Now, Lena had opened a store that sells farming equipment, and she has 3 younger siblings. She's just 19 years old, and she's taking care of them. She's gotten them uniforms. They're back in school. Now, keep in mind, in each of the towns that Zoe Ministry works in, they set up groups. They call them empowerment groups, people who meet together and support one another. And so happens that Lena is the chaplain to her group. And while Dr. Howell and his church were visiting there, they were able to go to a worship service, and Lena was preaching. And guess what she preached on? Dorcas. And Dr. Howell says it was the most amazing sermon he had ever heard in his life. It was in Swahili, and he only knew one word of Swahili, jambo. And she never said jambo throughout the entire sermon. But he understood everything that she said. So Lena started her sermon, and she was stroking some fabric that she had. And he thought, she's talking about Dorcas making clothing for the poor. But then she just falls to the ground and she didn't move. Well, this is when Dorcas died. There she is. But then Lena gets up and she runs across the room. And that's the people who went running off for Peter. And then she comes back and they have Peter with them. And then she gets down on her knees and she has her hands folded like she's praying, like those who prayed for Dorcas. And then she stood up. And that was Dorcas, who had come back to life. Well, here's the interesting thing. If you say to a group of middle, upper class white people, the dead are raised, we might say, like we kind of have this sense of entitlement almost. Like, well, of course I live on. Of course all is well with me. But saying the dead are raised to a group of people who have lived every day of their life within an inch of death, say God raises the dead, and they shout, and they sing, and they dance, and they laugh, and on they go. And it is a gift. It is a miracle. And it's not something you can manage on your own. It's not something that you deserve. It is God's great gift, the resurrection. And this is Christianity. That God has not left us alone. That God has come to us as a baby. Because God wants us to be tender with each other. And God teaches us to care for those who are weak and vulnerable. And then that child grew up and was raised from the dead so that death would not have the last word for any of us. And so that we could know the joy that is in the resurrection. And once we know the joy that is in that, you know what we do? We do something very simple. We do something with our hands. We do good. Always. And we help the poor. What else would we do as the people that God has saved? And yes, it is a long and patient work. Whether it is spending a week working on a building project at Bear Creek Camp, or sending cards to those who are lonely, or visiting with a friend who is experiencing a difficult time in life, or spending a Saturday making meals for others, or you name it. It's just one stitch, and then another stitch, and then another stitch. And then it becomes a piece of beauty. Amen. Thanks be to God.